African Americans. And so we come to this place each week to represent our constituents who are in pain. As of June 30th, just a few days ago, 491 Americans have been fatally shot by police. Most of those were African American. At this same point last year, 465 were killed by police. Last night, despicable crimes were committed against Dallas police officers, and when the dust settled, 5 of them were dead as a result of an organized execution by criminals who possessed guns and used them to the extreme. And so, the Congressional Black Caucus convenes today to say to America that we are continuing our fight to remove guns from the hands of would-be terrorists and criminals and require background checks for those seeking to purchase firearms. We need legislative action now. We don't need to leave the Hill this week or any week without assuring the American people that we understand the problem of police misconduct in America. We understand the murders of innocent Black Americans. We get it. We understand the problems faced by our law enforcement officers, and I don't want to diminish that in this conversation today. We understand the problems faced by law enforcement officers, most of whom put on the uniform every day and serve and protect our communities. Republicans, what on earth why are you recalling and not giving us a debate on gun violence? Why not give it a hearing? Give us a debate. Give us an up or down vote on our legislation on gun violence. Why? Last night, while on the floor, we were advised that several hundred protesters were en route to the Capitol, demonstrating and protesting and exercising the First Amendment rights, their First Amendment rights, by demanding that we, as elected officials, protect their sons and daughters and their grandsons and granddaughters, their brothers and their sisters. At 10 p.m., the Congressional Black Caucus, along with other members from other caucuses, went outside of the Capitol at the West Front, and we met the demonstrators. We spoke to them, we embraced them, and we helped lead their march to the White House. They told us with unambiguous clarity that Black lives matter, that the movement is serious, it is organized, and they demand legislative action now, and that we don't leave this place until it's done. We applaud the demonstrators last night for telling us that the deaths in Baton Rouge and Falcon Heights give them the energy and determination they need to pull off the Band-Aid of the stain of irresponsible police killings in America. The 2 acts of murder this week that we all so sadly know must be addressed by law enforcement. It must be addressed by the Congress of the United States. If we fail to act, this will be a long, hot summer. In the rally audience last evening, a young lady held up a sign that read, "I wept more last night than I slept." End of quote. Colleagues, America is weeping. They are angry. They are frustrated. And Congress, and when I say Congress, I mean the Republicans in Congress, are refusing to address gun violence in America that targets Black men and Black women and Hispanic men and Hispanic women, and yes, even police officers. The Congressional Black Caucus is frustrated. You want to say we're mad? We're mad. We are determined to take our advocacy now to a higher level. This is our responsibility to our constituents, and we thank you so very much for covering us today. We ain't going to let nobody turn us around. Thank you so very much. At this time, it is my honor to yield to the Dean of the U.S. House of Representatives, not the Dean of the Democrats, the Dean of the U.S. House of Representatives, the ranking member of the Committee on Judiciary, the Honorable John Conyers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are all here with a heavy heart and some growing anger about the process that is going on here in the Congress. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, we need to adopt gun violence prevention legislation to expand background checks to all gun purchases, and we need to reinstate a ban on the sale of military-style assault weapons. And at the same time, I also believe we need to take a comprehensive approach at addressing the issue of building and strengthening trust between local police and their communities. I've dedicated a lot of my time in Congress to policing issues, to gun violence prevention, introducing legislation, chairing town hall meetings across the country, and meeting with the grieving families of both citizens and fallen officers alike. And as a part of the controversial 1994 crime bill, I was able to pass the federal pattern and practice of enforcement provision that allows the Department of Justice to investigate state and local police departments, most recently like Ferguson and Baltimore, for unconstitutional and discriminatory hearing. Now I've introduced the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, which would provide local incentives for local police organizations to voluntarily adopt performance-based standards to ensure the incidents of misconduct will be minimized through appropriate management training and oversight protocols. And now we're working on negotiating a version of the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act to bring before our committee. However, like too many well-intended efforts, we're stuck trying to push toward a finish, but negotiations are still going on. We have to be able to find agreement on major items like accreditation standards, best practices, body cameras, and even data collection. The real challenge is now finding the support that will bring this bill forward in the committee. And so we must begin to deal with these tragic shooting deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, which have been avoided. And with better training, particularly in detentions and use of force, as addressed by accreditation standards and best practices provisions that are currently in negotiation. And so out of respect for all who have lost their lives, both law enforcement and civilian, we must dedicate ourselves to engaging the difficult issues to make lasting change in our communities and heal as a nation. We must debate and we must vote. That's what we're here for in the Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Conyers. Next will be Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from the 18th District of Texas, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Crime.
Mr. Chairman, I stand here today with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, each of whom have hearts and minds. And I know that we will hear soon from Congressman John Lewis, under whom many of us were tutored, along with the late Dr. Martin Luther King. We're advocates of nonviolence. We are students of protest. But we also, as our hearts are broken, as I mourn with my fellow Texans for the loss of 5 dedicated law enforcement officers who now have mourning them, their families and children and community. They died in the line of duty. And as members of the United States Congress, I've watched my colleagues fight for justice and equal treatment for all. And they've cried over the bodies of those who've been lost in gun violence. And as we've watched the protests that have gone on and those that will come, America should know that those protests were nonviolent. They were crying out for action. They were crying out in pain. But I never heard one person talk about an attack on law enforcement officers or undermining the laws of this nation, for we are a nation of laws. You will find that the movement that many of us were involved in, the protest movement, the violence came toward us. We did not offer any violence. So today we stand here answering the call of leadership. Each of these members will go home to their district. They will seek peace and understanding, but they will respond that there must be action. And so as we mourn the loss of those fallen last night in a criminal terrorist act of killing 5 officers, the largest since 9/11, we mourn Mr. Castile, we mourn Mr. Sterling. And we mourn all of those, and we ask that the nation sees us as leaders of peace. We're asking the Speaker of the House, we're asking the Majority Leader to now realize that an AR-15 does not discriminate. It finds itself in the hearts and the bodies of many that we love. And so we're calling on the passage of no fly, no buy. We're calling on the passage of closing the loophole, but we're calling on a passage of bringing together police and community, the Law Enforcement and Integrity Act. We hope that there will be roundtables of discussions between police and community, and that we'll be in the midst of those discussions calling upon peace. And then finally, let me say, we cannot do this without resources. Resources for police, resources for young people in pain, resources for community. We are fighting for monies that are needed to bring our communities together. I'll join with Congressman Conyers on the Judiciary Committee to fight for legislation that will respond to the needs of police and respond to the needs of community. My heart is broken, and we will pray this weekend in Houston, marching for peace, nonviolence, and the action of the United States Congress to take violent guns and violent people off the streets of this nation.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. The Congressional Black Caucus is the conscience of the Congress. The next speaker is the conscience of the Congressional Black Caucus, the gentleman from the 5th District of Georgia, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Chairman Butterfield. My wonderful sisters and brothers, the Congressional Black Caucus, we're like a family. We pray for our nation, for the people in Louisiana, Minnesota, for the police officers and the people of Dallas. There's not any room in our society for violence. As Sheila Jackson Lee said, we respect law enforcement. These individuals was only doing their job in Dallas. There need to be greater training of law enforcement. And sometimes I feel that maybe not only those of us that engage in nonviolent protests, but police officers need to be taught the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence, to respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. That's what we were taught. When we were arrested, jailed, and beaten, we didn't fight back. And today, we cry out. We feel the pain. We feel the hurt of the people in Baton Rouge and in Minnesota and Dallas and all across our country. But whatever we do, we must do it in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion to help redeem the soul of America and bring us together to create what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community. Because we all live in the same house. And it doesn't matter whether we're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We're one people, we're one family, we're one house. We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools. We have too many guns. There's been too much violence. And we must act. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman John Lewis. You led the way in 1963, 4, and 5, and you're leading the way today. Thank you so very much. The next speaker will be the Congressman from the 2nd District of Louisiana, Congressman Cedric Richmond.
Today I stand here speaking, and I would have to say today is probably the angriest I've ever been while addressing the public and the media. And I share the anger of our young kids. When we look at this Congress, we can do nothing but conclude that they are co-conspirators in the devaluation of the lives of men and women of color, and that the systematic devaluation from mass incarceration to the lack of investment in communities show that we have little faith or concern about their futures. Let me also say, Al Green, Congressman from Texas, reminded us yesterday, Dr. King's quote of, "In the end, it will not be the words of your enemies that you remember, but the silence of your friends." And John Lewis will tell you that during the Civil Rights Movement, one of the reasons why it was so strong was that people of all walks of life came together to talk about injustice. Well, we're calling on our friends from every community, from the human rights community, to the Jewish community, to the Hispanic community. We're calling on all of our friends to join in this fight about injustice. And let me just say, yesterday, a few of us joined together, and those in judiciary requested the chairman of judiciary to convene a hearing on the use of deadly force. Because we thought this country was at a tipping point where our young people were so frustrated, so angry, and had not seen any action while their friends and family are mowed down in the streets, that frustration was at a tipping point. And we again today call upon Speaker Ryan, Chairman Goodlatte, to convene an adult conversation about the use of deadly force, the need for AR-15s on our streets, the needs for high-capacity magazines, no fly, no buy. But if this Congress does not have the guts to lead, then we are responsible for all the bloodshed on the streets of America, whether it be at the hands of people wearing a uniform or whether it's at the hands of criminals. We bear that responsibility if we don't act. So in closing, I will just say, as the Congressional Black Caucus, we stand here today in a lot of pain. We stand here today very angry. We stand here today with our hearts very heavy. But we stand here today with our resolve stronger than it's ever been, that we can lead this country, and we have to show the leadership in this country to make this country that it should be, the country we want it to be, and the country that our precious children deserve. So I just want to thank you and thank my colleagues who I have learned so much from and their leadership on this issue. And we're not just the conscience of this Congress. We're the intellectual capacity of it too. And at some point, they will start to listen and start to follow, because the answers to our problems are contained in the intellectual capacity of this group. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Richmond. Please receive the Congressman from the 33rd District of Texas, Congressman Mark Beasley.
Good morning, and I am now in my second term in Congress, and I can tell you that this is the saddest day for me being a member of Congress. What happened in the city of Dallas last night, I represent part of Dallas, and not only this is the saddest day for me as a member of Congress, but I can't think of any other event in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in my lifetime that has been this solemn. I was on the phone earlier this morning, and I spoke to one of the police officers who was one of the families of the police officers that was killed. I talked to the mom and the aunt of one of the police officers that was killed. The police officer lived in Fort Worth in my district, and he grew up in the district that I represent, and his parents still live in the Fort Worth area. And I roundly condemn the violence that took place last night, and what happened to those police officers is absolutely horrible. It was hate-filled what happened. The police officers and the protesters were getting along last night. They were taking pictures with one another last night. The gunmen, the people that were involved in this senseless act, had nothing to do with the protesters. And the protesters and the police, according to some reports, after the shooting happened, even helped each other last night. And yesterday we had a press event to talk about what happened in Louisiana and to talk about what happened in Minnesota. I got to tell you, I have a 10-year-old son.
Take your time. Take your time.
He's more like his mom. He's looks like both of us, but he's more like his mom. And right now he's a cute 5th grader. He's going into the 5th grade. He's a cute 5th grader. But I worry about him when he gets older, when he gets into high school. What if he's out with some friends and he smarts off the wrong way? And I just don't want anything to happen to him just because maybe he shoots off, or maybe he doesn't do something that someone doesn't like, and have something happen to him. That could be prevented with just better understanding between the community and the police department. And just because I want that for my son does not mean that I don't support the police 100%. Without the police, we would have anarchy in the streets. We would have no order, and the country that we live in wouldn't be the country that we know today, where we have a free press, where we have freedom of speech, where we have the right to gather and protest. And that is all that I want. I want the police officers to be protected, but I do want to know that when my son gets a little bit older and and his voice starts to change, and he starts to put on weight like his dad, that he will be given the same benefit of the doubt that any other kid would be for maybe having a smart mouth, or maybe not doing what the police officer says that he didn't think that he should have been doing, or whatever the circumstances may be. I just want him to have that same chance as any of the other kids in his school. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Veazey. The next and final speaker before we open it up to questions and answers will be from the gentlelady from Chicago, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who returns to Washington each Monday night with horror stories from her community in Chicago, Cook County, Illinois. She not only is the only member who comes back and brings us these horror stories, but we have stories from Los Angeles and New York and San Antonio, and it just continues to repeat itself every week. But thank you, Congresswoman Kelly, for your advocacy.
Thank you, Chairman. The United States is on edge, and we have to decide if we're going to go over the cliff with gun violence and senseless murders, or are we going to take a step back and find the space for peace and solidarity. I associate myself with everything my colleagues have said. Our black men and boys cannot be continued to look at as animals in a jungle that are dangerous and shot all too often. But also, we cannot, I come from a family of law enforcement, and I texted my cousin in New York last night and my nephews in Chicago and told them to be safe, because I know they're trying to do the right thing and they're trying to protect us. We have to find peace together. We cannot continue like this, but we also, as been said, have to be the leaders in finding the solutions to this gun violence problem. It's the common sense gun laws, but it's police community relations, it's getting more African Americans in the law enforcement field, it's sustainable communities. What's the root causes? Why are people picking up guns, not books or pens and pencils? We have to get to the root cause also. We have to work together. Congresswoman Lawrence and I dropped a bill yesterday that deals with all of those components, because it's not just one thing. It is not just one thing. It's all of those things together. And I vow, and they know, to fight to the end. I haven't stood up for moments of silence in a long time, because I feel like we stand up, we sit down, and we don't do anything. And it is time to act. And it's time to act for everybody, whether you die alone, you die in a mass shooting, or you're a police officer that's senselessly murdered. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Thank all of my colleagues. We're open for questions. Yes, sir.
Congressman, the police chief.
Your name and organization?
CNN.
Yes, sir.
The police chief in Dallas this morning talked about the suspect who died. He said that he was wanted to kill white people. He said he wanted to kill cops. And he said he was upset by the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, you all have been blaming lack of gun control action for part of this problem. I'm wondering, do you have any concerns with the Black Lives Matter movement, some of the folks in there, and some of the things that people have been saying about the police, about the police leading to these kind of things?
We have to be intelligent enough to separate the issues that we are confronting today in America. The Congressional Black Caucus not only supports Black Lives Matter, but we embrace Black Lives Matter. Each member of our caucus feels that sentiment, and if not, he or she can speak for themselves, but I know all of them individually standing before you, and we collectively embrace the ideals and the goals of Black Lives Matter. There are multiple issues that we are facing in America. We are talking about, number one, about taking away guns from terrorists and would-be terrorists and criminals who use these guns to kill 491 police shootings in America so far this year. At this same point last year, 465 Americans were shot by police, senselessly and unnecessarily. So we've got to separate that. As Congressman Veazey said a moment ago, this does not discount our support for law enforcement all across the country. We've said in our private meetings and public meetings that 99.8% of police officers in this country are wonderful men and women who put on the uniform each day, and they serve and they protect and they defend us and they defend our constituents and our communities. And so I want us to be intelligent enough to separate the issues that we are talking about today. If someone goes in a building and assassinates 5 police officers, they are a terrorist. By any definition, they are a terrorist, and they are not part of the Black Lives Matter movement. what their motivations were. The criminal justice system and law enforcement will figure that out. I've seen the early reports this morning. But please, ladies and gentlemen, let's be intelligent enough to be able to separate the issues that we're debating today. This time I yield to Congressman Al Green from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, a comment. The nation is in mourning. We are a country that is suffering. And that suffering emanates from the loss of innocent human life. Innocent life, whether it is at the hands of these assassins who killed police officers or at the hands of persons who represent the constabulary, any loss of innocent life is something that we deplore and that we must always protect innocent life. I'm a former president of an NAACP, served as a judge of a small claims justice court, and a lawyer. I assure you that people of goodwill denounce any statements that have been made with reference to the shooting of peace officers. We absolutely, adamantly, totally oppose anyone who would advocate shooting police officers. We totally, completely, without hesitation, equivocation, or reservation, want to make it perspicuously clear. What happened in Dallas, Texas, was beneath the standards that human beings have set to live peacefully with each other. And we want to make sure that those persons who are involved in this are prosecuted to the fullest extent that the law allows. Just as anyone who harms a person who happens to be an innocent citizen with a taillight out, that person has to be punished to the fullest extent that the law allows. Now, with reference to the Congress of the United States of America, before we can get these acts of Congress to pass the legislation that my dear sister advocates for, that Mr. Richmond has talked about, before you can get an act of Congress, you have to have a Congress willing to act. The Congress of the United States of America has refused to act on issues of importance to the American people. The Speaker of the House has to be called on the carpet for what he has failed to do. Make no mistake about it. The Speaker has the power. He has the political power here to call and convene a meeting to bring in the head of the FBI and demand that he account for an investigation. If he can do this, he can demand that we bring in the appropriate people so that we can find out what's happening in this country. That is his responsibility, and we will not let him off the hook.
Thank you, Congressman Al Green. There's no question that the power to address this issue is in the hands of Speaker Paul Ryan, and I hope he understands the significant importance of bringing this bill to the floor. We continue to entertain questions. Yes, sir?
Jamie Lovegrove, Dallas Morning News. Congressman VC, I have a question for you.
All right,
What have you been hearing this morning from constituents and family members and friends in Dallas? And what's your message been back to them?
I did speak with the Dallas Police Department and was updated, and as much as they could update me on everything that's happened. And again, I talked with one of the parents of one of the slain police officers. Had been on the Dallas Police Department maybe a little under 10 years. Was a veteran also, served in the Navy, was currently in the Navy Reserve. Graduated from one of our local high schools in the Fort Worth Independent School District, Pascal High School. And just to let you know how close to home this hits, one of the staffers that worked in the Fort Worth office went to high school with the slain police officer and his wife. Graduated the same year as the wife, as a matter of fact. And so this is something that is very deep and close and personal to myself, as well as I'm sure Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. And you know, I've been in that same area in Dallas, more times than I can remember in downtown Dallas. Walk the streets, been entertained there, ate there. I mean, just everything. And just to see that happening in the Metroplex in Dallas it really hit me like I've never been hit before.
Thank you, Mr. Vesey. Next question. Yes, sir?
I'm Alex Schumann with Media General TV station group. My question is for Congressman Lewis. There's been a lot of talk about the civil rights movement in comparison. How does what African Americans face today different from what you faced in the 1963, 1964?
Come on, Mike. Chairman.
Sometimes I want to believe that we have made much more progress. But then I think if we're not standing still, I think sometimes we're sliding back. The scars and stains of racism is still deeply embedded in American society. And I think what is happening is saying that we cannot sweep it under the rug or in some dark corner. We have to deal with it. All of us. Members of Congress, local government, the religious community. But I have faith and hope that we would get there. We were jailed, we were beaten. I got arrested 40 times during the 60s. Left bloody, unconscious, by police officers. But I never hated. And each time I see a police officer, whether on Capitol Hill or back in Atlanta or someplace in Texas or Louisiana or wherever, in Ohio, wherever, I said, thank you for your service. I really believe that we must come to that point in our country where we respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. We can do it, but leaders must lead. I think here in the Congress, too many people, I hate to say it, are tail lights and not headlights.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, earlier you said that you were reaching out to friends in other communities, and I'm wondering what kind of feedback and support are you getting from Hispanic leaders, both in and out of Congress? And also, are you concerned by comments like the ones that former Congressman Joe Walsh was making last night on Twitter, calling the Black Lives Movement thugs and blaming President Obama for the chaos that we're going through as a country now? So I'm wondering, what are you hearing back from these folks, and also the fact that the NRA has been silent on this whole issue as well?
Thank you. And
separate issues, I'm sorry.
sure, Mr. Richmond will address your concerns, but I will make reference to the fact that Congressman Gutierrez from Illinois was with us last night, as well as and spoke passionately in our Democratic caucus, as well as Congressman Castro from Texas. Mr. Richmond.
Well, let me just say in Congress, a number of our colleagues from the Progressive Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus have joined on this issue, walked last night in protest also, and have been arm in arm with us as we address it. As we talk about the NRA, let me just tell you, the hypocrisy there is so blatant. One of the young men had a concealed carry weapon, a permit and weapon, which they advocate for, which they go around to states to advocate that they pass concealed carry laws, where you can bring weapons to work, to church, and to school. How do you advocate for that? And then you watch the result of it with a young black man who says, I have a permit, which you advocated for, and you sit by quietly. And I'll just tell you, look, my life experiences, I always thought the NRA was not concerned about me. And I hunt and I fish and I own a gun. But the last few days have clarified it for me that their Second Amendment concern is void of concern for African Americans. And I just believe that we cannot give them a pass on not making a comment, not defending this young man, and not calling for some change. Let me just touch on the end, which was Black Lives Matter. People cannot use Black Lives Matter as a scapegoat. Those young kids came together to protest something that was not imagined, something that was real. And they came back, they started protesting in Ferguson. And the sad part is we keep having more events that they have to protest. So when we talk about their anger and their frustration and their activism, you can't blame them for these incidents happening. And as much as people would like to call them thugs and other things, they do that for their comfort so that they can explain to themselves why bad things happen. And the truth of the matter is for young African-American kids and young African-American males, and I will tell you that Hakeem and VC and a couple of us yesterday, we had a press conference to reiterate that if we were not wearing suits, people would just lump us into the category as young black thugs based on how we dress. And it's unfair to do that to the Black Lives Movement that has been positive, that has created and sparked a debate where presidential candidates had to address the issue of whether Black Lives Matter. And let's just say, the fact that their number one goal is that law enforcement not kill unarmed black people should be low-hanging fruit. The ultimate goal is economic opportunity so every young black boy and girl can reach their dreams. And about blaming President Obama, that's just absolute nonsense from people who just can't get over the fact that Michelle Obama, President Obama, and his children wake up every day in the White House.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond. Yes.
Heather Cagle with Politico.
Please speak up a little bit.
I know yesterday you said that you guys had called for meetings with Attorney General Lynch and the FBI Director. Have those been set up? Is there any update on that?
Right. Yes. Mr. Jeffries, can you address that? You and I have been working on that along with you. Yes.
Well, the nation is in mourning right now because of the painful incidents that have taken place this week in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the suburbs of Minneapolis, and of course, tragically last night in Dallas. We are suffering right now. The scripture says that while suffering may endure during the long night, joy will come in the morning. But in order to get from suffering to joy, we've got to be willing in America to have a meaningful, legitimate, authentic conversation about the challenges that race continue to pose and the relationship between law enforcement and communities of color. And that's why we've called for a high-level conversation, unfettered, between leadership here in the Congressional Black Caucus, the Attorney General, the FBI Director, and people in the law enforcement community from all throughout the land, in order to make sure that we can turn tragedy into triumph through action. And let me just lastly comment about the Black Lives Matter movement. John Lewis will tell you that in order to make progress in America as we continue to march toward a more perfect union, you need peaceful agitation to precede legislation. And I think that's simply what the overwhelming majority of young people in America want, to be able to grow up and fully experience the American dream without the possibility of it being tragically cut short by either a criminal or a rogue police officer. And we'll continue to affirm that as we move forward.
May I just add something from last night? I started out by saying that our hearts are broken. I indicated that we would hear from our conscience of the Congress, John Lewis. Many of us are students not only of John Lewis, but Dr. Martin Luther King. And in his letter from the Birmingham jail, he told us to leave our places and to fight against injustice. It should be very clear, and we should repeat it again. We are praying for the families of those fallen officers, and it was a terrorist act and a mass shooting. We are brokenhearted and sad. But it should be very clear that this violent perpetrator using an AR-15 said that he was not affiliated with any group, that he came out of hate and anger. And what we're saying to you is we are among these young people. And I want to call the name of DeAndre. He's a big young man, 6'5". He was out last night in the Washington protests. As a mother, as I watched those children welcoming the fact that somebody cared about them, when we finally reached the White House, this young man broke down on the ground. He was so overwhelmed that he had been able to lead John like you did as a young man, nonviolently. And all he said to us was, Terry Sue, do something. He said, no fly, no buy. I was so impressed that he even knew those words. But he fell on the ground. I think America needs to use us as leaders of unity. We want to do that, to be unified, and to be as much a unifying force for law enforcement officers who are serving their nation, and for those young people who have seen the loss of life and are praying for action from all of us. We are going to do that, and I think we can do that if the nation listens to what peace and nonviolence is and listens to the call of Dr. King and John Lewis that we must fight against injustice. It was not Black Lives Matter. It was a person intending for violence.
Thank you. Let's go to my far left. Yeah.
Question for Congressman Lewis.
Last question.
A question for Congressman Lewis, if I may. Amanda Walker, Sky News. With every piece of graphic footage that emerges of the latest police shooting, anger is mounting and mounting. From your experience, how is it possible to contain that? What's your message?
Constructive anger is okay.
Sometimes when people are knocked down, or beaten, arrested, in jail, or sometimes when some of our leaders, some of our co-workers and friends are murdered, we have the capacity, we have the ability to get up and move in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion. This young woman here, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, was born and reared in Selma, Alabama. Her mother and father and relatives were involved. Schoolmates marched across the bridge. They were beaten and tear gassed. They didn't fight back. But because of what they did, we got a Voting Rights Act passed. And now hundreds and thousands and millions of our citizens can participate in the democratic process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman John Lewis. We're closing out. I want to thank all of you for coming today on short notice. Thank you for your coverage. Please know that we believe in the Congressional Black Caucus that this movement is maturing. It started with Trayvon Martin and even before Trayvon Martin, and it has continued to escalate. This is a movement that we're going to be serious about, and there will be more announcements yet to come. Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson represents the Dallas community. She lives a few blocks from where these police officers were sadly assassinated last night, and she joins us in this effort today. Thank you for coming. Thank you, John. Thank you.